and welcome to this episode of the Truth in Data podcast. I'm Kim, and I'm here with.
I'm Debbie.
Great to be with you all again. Today, we're going to be talking about the CSI effect and folks who work within, policing and digital evidence and even just forensics in general. Doesn't even have to be digital forensics, but forensics in general, or folks that I think even are in the supportive role of just the legal process, I feel like.
Prosecutors.
Yeah, absolutely, is where the CSI effect is really kind of come about. So tell me what your definition of that is, Debbie.
I mean, obviously popular, the reason that this has occurred, or one of the main reasons, is popular television shows. Like all of the investigative shows, whether it's NCIS or CSI or FBI or any of these shows. So, they're 1 hour long shows, and they speed up this process of forensics, whether it's crime scene forensics, whether it's DNA or drug testing or fiber or digital evidence. They've sped it up to fit a 1 hour show, but also even more concerning, they purport, or they portray things in forensics that occur but are not accurate. And so it causes people to think that that's true and accurate, and that the police can really do that. They can really do that, and they can do it that quickly. And that, for juries, that creates the mindset that, well, why didn't they do this in this case? On TV, they show this. So it's the public's perception of forensic science and law enforcement that is honestly inaccurate because of TV shows.
That's exactly right. And so I think that it's interesting because one, I think everybody, we've always kind of had these kind of cop shows, for years since TV's been around. There's been cop shows, right? And they've just escalated because of the complexities of crimes, I think. And so it's made for better television, right? And these folks are out there, and some of them are better. They do a better job than others, right?
Right.
Portraying what's actually going on in terms of working a crime. And some of these TV shows, they actually have some consultants that actually do a good job of sharing with them. But really, when you get down to it, the thing is that they've got 45 minutes maybe at best with the commercials to be able to wrap this all up into a nice tiny little bow. When in reality, this is no joke. There was a case that I worked on in 2012 that just got adjudicated a few months ago.
Unfortunately, I'm not surprised.
So that being said, things are not 45-minute cases ever. They're never a 45-minute case. So that creates this feeling. And even though I think here's one of the reasons why it is concerning for me is that you said jurors, definitely. So when you have to take something to trial, then we do have this unrealistic expectation or unrealistic view from the jurors. But then look at this from the victim perspective. If you actually have something that has occurred to you, and you think that it's going to be so easy for a case to be proven and to be to be solved and to be taken through the court system, that's where I feel like that we're letting people down.
Absolutely. And another thing, so public perception, not just jurors and victims, but also public perception. So I think the most concerning one for the public would be, say, officer involved use of force and body worn cameras and video evidence allegedly showing exactly what happened. And a lot of times it does, but there's also commonly more to the story. So but people believe, due to a variety of things, that that the police should be doing something, and a lot of times it's not even possible.
Right, and these shows don't take into account a lot of things in terms of additional things that actually go on behind the scenes when a case is being worked. Like there are internal policies, there are laws, there are rules that you have to go through in order for cases to be pushed through the legal
Evidentiary
process.
rules. Yes.
There are all of these, and it makes it for a very long, drawn out process often for a case to actually come from start to finish, right?
It is. I mean, if you think about all of the things that happen, say, in a regular homicide case, even if they have, say, it's a homicide case and they arrest someone in just a few days, the case still is being built, and they have to still probably conduct interviews. They have to look at camera footage from the area. They have to, they have likely worked a crime scene or multiple crime scenes, and they have to not only log all of that evidence properly, log it into the evidence room, they have to process all of that evidence. Does some of it go to the crime lab? There's ballistics, there's fingerprints, there's DNA, there's blood spatter, all of these things. And all of those things have to be analyzed, and, and multiple, maybe interviews again, timelines created, digital evidence looked at, phones, computers, IoT devices, whether it's wearables or all of these things, that all takes time. And unfortunately, with law enforcement resources the way that they are commonly, many times there aren't enough resources to make any of that happen quickly, and there are multiple cases going on at any given time. And so, public misconception of how fast things can occur, not just what can occur. There are misconceptions about the capabilities, but the time involved, and I think not really realizing all of the things that go into working. And I just talked about a homicide investigation. There's all other types of investigations as well.
Right. And, it is a big challenge, I think, because it's the way that the public views this, right, and views law enforcement and the working of crimes in general. But then when there is something complicated, then it does take a huge amount of time that is not seen. And there's a lot of things that you don't necessarily, if you are a law enforcement agency, you don't necessarily want or need to or should share everything at every moment. Whereas a TV show, that's the point. You're getting to see behind the scenes. You're getting to see it all. You're getting an explanation. You're getting the reason. You're getting to know it all. And that's why people love them. And that's awesome. And I love the fact that people have interest in it. Maybe it's made more people want to go into law enforcement. That's fantastic. However, in real life, you don't, for the protection of victims and for the integrity of the case, you cannot share those things as you go.
You're so right. I see a lot of victims or victims' families on TV saying the law enforcement is not sharing any of the details with us. Well, I understand that. There are, like you said, there are reasons. Many times law enforcement may not have ruled out some of the family members, or they may feel as though some family members are involved, or that they might release information that they shouldn't. So there are reasons. It's often not that law enforcement wants to keep that information from a family that maybe would make them feel better, but there are legitimate reasons to not release information. But I also think that some of the best law enforcement agencies are as transparent as they can be in those situations and release what they can and ask for the public's help in certain circumstances. But transparency does go a long way. That's probably a whole nother podcast, but
right. Yeah, it is. But you mentioned something that I think is very important in this, is that you said, like whenever there's a crime that occurs and you may have evidence that's taken and that needs to be processed, which it may have to go to a crime lab that does have to do ballistics, that takes some time. It may have to do, you may have blood and other things that need to be tested at your crime lab.
Drug testing, fibers, fingerprints, all of these things.
You may have digital evidence that needs to be processed. And
yes,
to add into this is that a lot of these labs that do this all have a backlog. You're more than likely not going to
not the only case.
Yeah, you're not going to be the only case, and you're not going to be able to press it to the front of the line most likely because there's four others that had happened before you, or 50
Yes.
others that had happened before
Yes.
you. So it may be. There may be exigent circumstances. Don't get me wrong. However, oftentimes there's a queue, and that's not always going to be a quick process. And even if you were to the front of the line, trust me, I think it's so funny whenever I would tell people that I was a forensic examiner, and they would say, "Oh, you're just like so and so on that show." I'm like, "Am I? I don't even know who that is," because I tried one time to watch one of those shows, and it ticked me off so bad that I was like, "I can't watch this. This is making me a nervous wreck. That's not how you would do this. This isn't how this works." So
No.
so it's what just wasn't realistic enough. So all that is to say is that it's not necessarily realistic because they are wrapping it up for you in 45 minutes, and there are processes within a forensic process, and there are methods that have to happen, not just in digital forensics, other types of forensics, that it takes time. That's the whole point, is that there are things that have to take some time. In digital forensics, if you've got a lot of evidence, you're going to have to process it, and that's going to take a good amount of time. So
Well, and
you're
you have to
just
maintain the integrity of the evidence. It's the processes are there for a reason. So there's time involved, but part of that is just simply processing the evidence. But part of it is there are processes in place, whether it's peer review or validation or things like that that have to occur. It's easy maybe to get leads super quickly and provide those to investigators. However, other things have to happen to ensure that the information and the data is being interpreted properly.
That's exactly right. So it's not just enough for you oftentimes to just to just quote process it. I mean, then we have our
Right,
analysis portion of it, right?
right,
We are, analysis analysts essentially, where we have to take a look at the data and to be able to interpret it properly. And you may need to use other tools. You may need to do additional processing, which takes a while. And that could take some additional time. But the whole point of your forensic data, whether it's digital evidence or other forensic evidence, is the whole root of the word forensic means to bring to the court, right? It has to be, in order for your forensic results to be brought to the court, they should be able to be replicated by a third party, meaning that you're going to be able to provide these results, provide what your analysis results are, and then someone else could come and arrive at the same conclusion. So there are numerous things that you have to do in order to ensure that what you are going to go to testify from a forensic perspective, that indeed that is the truth in our instance, the data, but that is the truth in what is actually being or was submitted there to you. So that's very time consuming. That takes a great amount of time on our end, not just again from the processing point where something's happening kind of in the background, but from our human perspective where
right.
we need to lay eyes on something and to do some of this.
Absolutely. And talking about like the time that it takes to do certain things, and public misperception or misconceptions, just getting in. So we talk about mobile phones, just getting into a mobile phone, that may have a lock screen on and it's locked. And, using forensic tools to do that, there are times that may take over a year. I know it's taken multiple years sometimes, and I don't think that that's ever expressed in a 1 hour TV show.
That's
Like,
right. And
and it leaves the public and jurors asking, why isn't law enforcement doing anything? Why isn't law enforcement doing this? They should have done this. They should have checked this. They should have. And it's possible that they are, but it just is not at the time frame in which they believe it should or can happen.
here's the other thing: they may have some unrealistic expectations on what is
Yes.
even possible.
Yes.
It may not even be possible because, in our instance in digital evidence, the data may not be there to even get. In some other, portions of the crime, they may just have these unrealistic expectations because it just was not feasible. It's not something that can truly happen and to support the case. So the unrealistic expectations is a challenge within there. There was something else that we saw when we were talking about this, Debbie, was the reverse CSI effect, which is
Yes.
yeah, which is the that criminals are getting smarter because they're watching these, and so they're learning what not to do. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say maybe there's a few of our criminals out there that, yeah, they've learned some tips and tricks came from these types of shows, but there is so much information, not to help them any further, but there's so much information that's already out there on the internet that I'm like, I don't know. I think from a technical perspective, I think there's a whole world out there of folks that are doing bad things that kind of all work together that I don't think TV even scratches the surface on what they do.
Oh, absolutely. Obviously, TV can certainly show criminals what is possible. But there are criminals out there that are unfortunately very smart and understand how to use technology to commit their crimes and to hide their tracks. Do I think that's most criminals? No, but that's just sort of a feeling, from years of being in law enforcement. But I do think that there are, leaving a digital trail, especially with a mobile phone. I really do think you can't commit a crime today without leaving some form of digital evidence, whether it's your mobile phone or a mobile phone, cameras. There's cameras almost everywhere, whether it's at the local fast food drive-through or the dry cleaners or the gas station or Ring doorbells. All of these things. There is virtually nothing, and there's even flock safety, LPRs, license plate readers, and all of these things. It would be very difficult to commit a crime without some form of digital component with
Mm-hmm.
that.
That's exactly right. Which leads to, which we've talked about several times, the digital forensics backlog that we have out there, because a lot of these folks that if they are examining the video, if they're examining the phones, if they're examining whatever that is, even the cloud data extractions that law enforcement may get, those are oftentimes going to those forensic laboratories that the examiners are having to do. So that's why, all this extra huge amounts of data that we got out there in the world right now is fantastic. But when it comes down to truly using it, oftentimes what we're doing with the data that we get, we are reducing that data down to get what is actually usable or what is going to be of the most use. And again, there's more and more data, so that should help folks to understand that the more data there is, the more difficult it makes for people to actually be able to get through it and to find what is important or the most important to use within these cases.
Absolutely. And, we can talk about both things. Obviously, we are looking for any data that tells the truth, right? Truth in data.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be helpful to the prosecution or helpful to the case, or it could rule out people. It could be exculpatory. So, we are literally trying to sift through terabytes of data often, trying to find the data that will tell us what actually happened, whether it fits the narrative of the investigation or a prosecution's narrative or not. Like it is simply trying to find and that's hard. Sifting through terabytes of data to find all of the relevant data takes time.
Right. And I'll say this, you touched on something that I think is great, is that oftentimes, of course, most of these shows that we're talking about, yes, there's a crime that has been committed. They're looking to, see it through so that
A suspect, and
yeah,
then
there's a suspect.
key on that suspect.
That's right. I don't know because I don't often watch these shows. However, I'm going to guess that most of the time they actually have someone that ends up in trouble for this. How often do they actually end up where it's like, no, they didn't do it? And I know that
Very, very rarely.
yeah, and I know that, and that's how we end up with unsolved crimes, right? But there may be crimes that are very difficult to prove, which even adds to this probably frustration from the public's perspective with crimes. because it can be very frustrating for folks, especially, if they are victims or families along those lines.
Absolutely. I'll give you a good example in CSAM world. CSAM is traded, images are traded globally throughout the world. And while many of those children are identified, many of them are not. We have the images, we have the videos. Oftentimes it's not an original. It's been traded so many times that it's not necessarily an original, but we still can't trace those. Like, the public would likely believe if we have the video, we should be able to find exactly where that child is and who it is. And while that is a priority for any CSAM investigation, the reality is actually finding where that child is and who that child is actually very difficult. So the expectations at using digital evidence, we have, whether we have account names and IP addresses, often they're not original. So tracing that is actually very difficult. And I do think that the public would assume that that would be easy for us.
Right. And there are some portions of it that are, however, but because now at our stage, where the internet has been around for so long, where we've got so much data that is just, I will say, quote, out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And things, as you said, have been traded so many times that oftentimes that ability to be able to figure out the origins of something gets degraded over time, and
yes.
just makes
we know what you're.
Yeah, makes it difficult for us to figure that out, and it's over time you've got less of a chance of figuring out the origins of that.
Right.
So it's very it's just adds to the challenge again.
There are limitations.
Data, right. And there are limitations that we have to do. So what can we do then? I mean, if we want to try to help folks to understand from folks who have sat there as, I think the girl's name's Abby. They're like, oh, you're like Abby. I don't know who Abby is. Apparently she was a digital forensic
She's an
examiner.
analyst. Yeah, an
okay.
examiner and an analyst. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So she's also the one though that puts in one of my. I'll do a side journey here for just a second. One of the biggest things in these investigative shows are the fact that you can enter in someone's name and their entire life pops up in one, everything about them pops up by just entering their name. And that's not actually, there is no database like that. There are companies that are trying to make those types of tools, but that we are not there yet. So, but like, you asked, how do we fix this? Well, you have a podcast and you talk about it. But you just like, trying to discuss strategies to address the unrealistic expectations created by this education, which is sort of what we're trying to do with this particular episode. Talk about, educate the public, and I think law enforcement, public information officers, talking about, when I think a valid response to a family who is saying they are not providing us with any information. The answer to that is, investigations take a long time. We do have, a wide variety of evidence, both physical and digital, and those things take time. And we are prioritizing this appropriately, and we will provide whatever information we can. But I think educating the public and law enforcement being as transparent as possible. It's not just up to us to, people like us who were in law enforcement to educate. It's current law enforcement that can talk about these challenges in any investigation. And so, I think that's one thing. And clearly communicating this in court, clearly, I think that's up to the prosecution to say why things took so long, or in expert witnesses, why did things take so long? Why were you not able to get this information? Why did you do things this way? So, I think that the education and clear communication about what we're dealing with are some things that we can do.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and this comes back every episode, I think we talk about communication is key.
We do.
It is key for the folks that are out there, working these cases, to be able to communicate well with the public and with the victims' families, victims' families, to be able to help them to understand. And then also the support folks that you may have that are around. You may be working with, caseworkers, things along those lines, child advocacy centers, folks like that. You may have a huge amount of people that is on this whole team that need to compile all of this information together in order to actually have this, push through the system, so to speak.
And have a clear picture. Gathering all of this information that we've been talking about just for one case takes so much time, and communicating that, I absolutely, like you said, communication is important, will help. I think being cognizant of the fact that the public does really want to know, and my personal opinion about, government is the public has a right to know what the government is doing. Obviously, we can't hurt a case. We can't release information that may compromise the integrity of an investigation, but being understanding that the victim's family, trying to give them as much information as possible, being human, understanding that people do really, it would provide some level of comfort to provide, but communicating those types of things, being real with people, but realistic about your case.
I agree. Absolutely. Communicating, just making sure that people understand what's actually what they're capable of doing, what they're capable of providing. Yeah. And to let them know and to keep them updated. That's oftentimes where folks say, yeah, well, I talked to them this day, but then I didn't hear anything back for how long. Well, keeping them updated is definitely important.
I do know there are some investigators, detectives that will regularly, they will put it on their calendar to call the victim's family and just touch base and say, hey, we haven't been able to, we're still processing digital evidence, or we're waiting on DNA results, or, we do have a few more interviews that we need to conduct. And I think that goes a long way, just simply touching base, even if there's nothing to say. I know it's one more thing to add to their already busy to-do list, but I do know some investigators and detectives that do that regularly.
I think that's a great strategy. Absolutely. Well, this has been a great episode, Debbie. Thanks.
I love chatting about things like this, so it has been fun.
It's so fun, but thank you all for listening in, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.